Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a crowded room, strangers everywhere, voices blurring into a low hum. Someone approaches you, their smile warm, their question simple. So, what do you do? Before a word leaves your mouth, something flickers inside you. A tightening in the chest, a subtle fear of judgment, a compulsive urge to say something impressive. Not necessarily true, just impressive. You smile back, you play the role. But inside, a familiar voice whispers, "Don't mess this up." Where did that voice come from? Maybe it sounds like your father's voice, or your teacher's. Maybe it doesn't have a voice at all, just a feeling, a silent, invisible hand tugging at your choices. How you dress, who you trust, what you believe you deserve, and most of all, what you avoid. You think you're choosing freely, navigating life through logic and maturity, but are you? Or are you still trying to impress someone who no longer watches you? Still trying to win a love that was once withheld? Still trying to prove you're not what someone long ago made you feel you were? What if I told you that the decisions you make, who you love, what you fear, how you speak, when you stay silent, are not fully your own? That behind every action lies a shadow of a child you once were, watching, hoping, aching to be seen. Consider this unsettling paradox. We grow older, we gain knowledge, we pay taxes, we drive, vote, negotiate, build businesses, raise children of our own. But under the surface, we remain haunted by moments that happened when we were 4, or 6, or 10. Moments we barely remember, but never really left. Words we heard, affection we didn't receive, smiles we had to earn. And no matter how successful, loved, or mature we become on the outside, those early emotional blueprints keep whispering behind the curtain, telling us who we think we are, what we think we can, have, what we must never show the world. You think you're afraid of failure, but maybe you're afraid of reliving that moment your mother looked away when you needed her most. You think you're ambitious, but maybe you're still trying to be good enough for the approval that never came. You think you're independent, but maybe you've simply learned never to need anyone because needing once led to pain. These scripts run silently, like old software on new machines. Imagine making every major decision in your life, your career, your partner, your way of dealing with conflict based on unconscious memories from when you were a fragile, impressionable child. Not because you're weak or irrational, but because your nervous system, your emotional compass, and even your sense of identity were built back then, built in response to what hurt, what felt safe, what gave you love, and what made it disappear. This isn't Psychology 101. This is your reality, unfolding daily in your routines and reactions. And if you're honest with yourself, you've felt it. That odd feeling that you're reacting more than choosing, that some decisions seem to choose you, that no matter how hard you try to move on, something keeps pulling you back. Why does a simple rejection feel like abandonment? Why does criticism feel like humiliation? Why does love sometimes feel suffocating? Why do you chase the wrong people and push away the right ones? The answers don't lie in your adulthood. They lie in the small, fragile moments you've buried. Moments when you learned, without words, what you had to be in order to survive, to belong, to be loved. But here's the terrifying part. You don't remember most of it. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real to hold on to. So your mind wrapped it in stories. Your body encoded it in tension. Your personality formed around it like scar tissue. And no, who you call it, just who I am. But what if it's not who you are? What if it's who you became in order to survive? And what if those survival strategies, once necessary, are now the very thing keeping you from the life you crave? You were shaped long before you could choose, but you can choose to look back, to examine, to question, and ultimately, to rewrite. But first, you must see the hidden architecture of your mind for what it truly is. And that begins with a simple but uncomfortable truth. You're not deciding, you're reenacting, not out of weakness, but out of loyalty. Loyalty to your past. Loyalty to the child in you who thought this was the only way to be safe. So the question is no longer, why do I keep doing this? The question is, whose voice is guiding me? Let's go deeper. Let's uncover the hidden force that built your inner world, and how it quietly became the blueprint for every choice you've made since. There's a strange thing about the past. You think it's over. You think it's behind you, tucked away in photo albums, childhood bedrooms, and memories blurred by time. But the past is not behind you. The past is within you, and it doesn't sit quietly. It whispers in your preferences, it murmurs through your anxiety, it steers your relationships like invisible hands on the wheel. Because your childhood didn't just influence who you are, it constructed you, your fears, your longings, your patterns of love, even your definition of normal. They were shaped not by logic, not by reason, but by emotional necessity. And herein lies the hidden problem. The mind of a child made decisions your adult self still obeys. Carl Jung called it the complex, an emotionally charged set of memories and perceptions tied to early life experiences, buried in the unconscious but alive in behavior. These complexes become autonomous, like small egos within the ego. You don't choose them, they act through you. That intense jealousy you feel when your partner spends too much time with someone else, that compulsion to achieve and impress even when no one is watching, that deep irrational guilt for saying no. You think it's about the present, but the roots are tangled in your past, in the room where you cried alone and no one came, in the day you showed joy and were punished for it, in the night you needed comfort but learned to self-soothe in silence. As children, we don't process these things intellectually. We feel them, we make meaning out of them, and we adapt, not to thrive, but to survive. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "The greatest mistake you can make is to believe you are thinking when you are merely rearranging your prejudices. Replace prejudices with childhood adaptations, and you have a brutal psychological truth. You're not as free as you think." Freedom implies self-awareness. But how can you be aware of decisions you made before you had language to explain them? A child doesn't say, "I fear intimacy because love felt unsafe." A child learns that closeness leads to pain and slowly builds armor, over years with silence until the armor becomes personality. A child doesn't say, "My needs don't matter." They just stop asking. And then the adult wonders why they always feel unseen. This is where Gabor Maté's insights on trauma become piercingly relevant. He defines trauma not as what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. It's not the event, it's the internal response. Your nervous system memorizes what safety feels like, or rather, what it doesn't feel like. If you had to suppress your anger to keep the peace, that suppression becomes muscle memory. If your joy was too loud for your caregivers, joy becomes dangerous. If sadness was met with ridicule, you'll smile while you suffer. So years later, when your partner says, "Just tell me how you feel," you can't. Not because you don't want to, but because the pathway to feeling has rusted shut. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that we are condemned to be free, thrown into existence with the burden of choice, yet constantly tempted to escape that freedom through self-deception. One of the greatest self-deceptions, that we are rational actors. We're not. We're children in adult costumes. We build careers, families, reputations, but beneath it all, our inner 6-year-old is still steering the ship, hoping no one sees how scared he really is. We don't grow up, we just become more sophisticated at hiding our wounds, and society, it rewards the mask. Show confidence, not vulnerability. Be productive, not introspective. Achieve, win, impress. Don't ask why you're doing it. In this way, culture becomes a mirror of unresolved childhood trauma on a mass scale. Millions of people chasing approval in the form of likes, money, status, because once, long ago, a child just wanted someone to say, "I see you, you're enough." We've industrialized the craving, we've pathologized emotion, we've forgotten that beneath the adult coping, there is a child still waiting to be understood. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But here's the thing, what if your why was chosen before you had the power to question it? What if you've spent decades trying to become someone you were never meant to be, just to fulfill a story written by your unmet needs? You believe you want success, but maybe you just want to feel worthy. You say you value independence, but maybe it's just the only thing that never left you. You think you're driven by goals, but maybe you're haunted by ghosts. So let us call this what it is, not a flaw, not a weakness, a psychological inheritance. Your decisions are echoes, Your fears are echoes. Your identity is, in part, an echo. And echoes do not fade by ignoring them. They fade when you listen closely, when you trace their origin. When you meet the child inside you and ask, not with shame, but with love, what were you protecting? Because every coping mechanism you've ever used, avoidance, perfectionism, people-pleasing, anger, withdrawal, was a brilliant, unconscious way to survive a world that didn't meet you with the safety you needed. But what helped you then may be destroying you now. So, if you truly want to understand why your decisions feel reactive, why love feels dangerous, why success feels hollow, why peace seems unreachable, you must go back, not to relive the past, but to retrieve the part of yourself that never got to grow up, the part frozen in time, still making your choices, still pulling your strings, and only once you find that child can you begin to rewrite the script. But before you break free, you must see the cost of staying trapped. Let's explore the unseen consequences, those invisible forces that silently shape your reality while convincing you they don't exist. You wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something heavier, like a life that's quietly wearing you down. You go through the motions, you smile when expected, you chase goals that no longer excite you, or maybe never did. You keep busy, not because you're fulfilled, but because silence feels unbearable. You're not falling apart, you're functioning. But something inside you knows, this isn't freedom, this is survival in disguise, and survival always comes at a cost. We've talked about how childhood shapes your emotional wiring. But what happens when those unconscious patterns become permanent fixtures in your life? The answer is chilling. You lose yourself. Not dramatically, not all at once. You lose yourself in small compromises that add up over years. In the relationship you stayed in too long. In the career that looks impressive but feels empty. In the silence you keep when your soul is screaming. This is how the past wins. Not with force, but with repetition. The child who learned not to cry becomes the adult who doesn't ask for help. The child who was only praised for being quiet becomes the adult who can't speak up. The child who was punished for mistakes becomes the adult who fears taking risks. And so, the very things that made you adaptive as a child, compliance, emotional numbness, overachievement, become chains in adulthood. You don't rebel, you replicate. Let's talk about the science. Your brain's neural pathways are shaped early. The amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, all of which influence fear, memory, and decision-making, are especially sensitive to early emotional environments. When your environment was chaotic, your brain adapted by becoming hypervigilant. You scan for danger, even where there is none. When your emotions weren't mirrored or validated, your brain learned to suppress them. You now struggle to even name how you feel. When your needs were ignored or punished, your brain encoded that need itself is dangerous. These patterns don't disappear with age. They become default settings. And most terrifying of all, you don't know they're there. You think this is just how life is. Psychologists call this schema conditioning, deep-seated, recurring patterns of thought and behavior formed in response to early life experiences. These schemas control what you notice, how you interpret events, and what you expect from others. If you carry a defectiveness schema, you'll expect rejection, even in love. If you have an emotional deprivation schema, no relationship will feel like enough. If you formed a subjugation schema, you'll prioritize others' needs until you forget your own. And here's the cruel twist. These patterns don't just affect your internal life, they shape your external reality. You unconsciously seek out environments that match your blueprint, not because they're good for you, but because they're familiar. You date emotionally unavailable people because it feels like home. You pursue goals not out of passion, but out of a desperate attempt to finally feel worthy. You avoid conflict not because you're kind, but because somewhere deep inside, you believe your voice doesn't matter. You are drawn, again and again, to the pain you never resolved. This is called repetition compulsion, a concept introduced by Freud and later expanded by Jung. It's the tendency to recreate early trauma in new relationships, hoping to finally rewrite the ending. But until you see the pattern, the ending stays the same. Now zoom out. Think about the collective consequences. What happens when millions of people, unaware of their emotional conditioning, build societies, institutions, and cultures? You get a world obsessed with productivity because self-worth was tied to performance. You get schools that reward obedience over curiosity because emotions were always inconvenient. You get relationships that mimic parent-child dynamics because intimacy still feels unsafe. Entire systems become reflections of unhealed childhoods. We don't just pass on our genes, we pass on our wounds. You think you're choosing your life, but really, you're playing out a script. A script where love feels like chasing, where rest feels like laziness, where authenticity feels dangerous. And each time you obey that script, it gets stronger. Each time you silence your need, it gets quieter. Each time you betray yourself to be accepted, your true self fades a little more. But here's where the pain becomes prophecy. You can only stay asleep for so long. Eventually, the cost becomes unbearable. The fake smiles crack. The job title stops numbing the shame. The body breaks down. The loneliness gets too loud. Your nervous system revolts. Your soul begins to whisper, "This isn't who I am." And yet, even then, you resist. Because healing requires more than awareness. It requires loss. You must lose the identity you built to survive. You must mourn the love you never got. You must risk being misunderstood, disliked, even rejected. But the alternative is worse: to live a life that was never truly yours. Let's pause here. Think about a decision you regret, a pattern you keep repeating, a part of you that never feels satisfied no matter how much you achieve. What if that part isn't broken, but unheard? What if your symptoms, your anxiety, your burnout, your overthinking are not dysfunctions, but messages? Messages from the child within. Messages that say, "Please stop, please see me, please set me free." You don't need another productivity hack. You don't need to think more positively. You need to go back, not to relive your pain, but to reparent the version of you that never felt safe enough to exist. But how? How do you rebel against an identity that once saved your life? That's where we go next. It's time to break the cycle, to rewrite the code, to meet your pain with presence, and finally choose differently. Freedom doesn't come gently. It doesn't whisper. It doesn't wait. It crashes into your life in the form of panic attacks, failed relationships, breakdowns that feel like death but are actually birth. Because the path to liberation is not upward, it is inward. And the first step is not to become someone new, but to unlearn who you were told to be. You were trained to survive, not to live. You were conditioned to please, to suppress, to adjust. You became a master of self-control, but at the cost of self-connection. So if you want to rebel, truly rebel, you don't start by screaming at the world. You start by listening to the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. You start by feeling what you were once praised for numbing. This rebellion isn't loud, it's intimate, it happens in quiet, radical moments, saying no when you were taught to always say yes. Resting when your mind screams that rest is lazy, crying without apologizing for it. Holding yourself in your own arms, like a child who finally feels safe. But don't mistake simplicity for ease. This is the hardest work you will ever do. Because healing doesn't just change your feelings, it dismantles your identity. That voice that says, "Don't be too much." It has a name. That fear of being abandoned when you show emotion. It has a story. That shame you carry every time you try to take up space. It's not yours. It was given to you. And now you have to give it back. So how do you do that? Step 1. Name the pattern. You cannot change what you won't admit exists. Start noticing your reactions, not to judge them, but to understand them. When do you go numb? When do you overreact? What triggers your fear, your guilt, your withdrawal? These are not flaws, they are footprints, clues pointing to the original injury. Step 2. Trace it back. Ask yourself, when did I first feel this way? Not what caused this, but when did I learn this was the way to stay safe? You'll be surprised how often the answer is hidden in moments long forgotten. The cold dinner table, the unreachable parent, the time you cried and heard, "Stop being dramatic." Step 3. Talk to the child. This may sound strange. It's not. Inner child work is one of the most psychologically grounded, spiritually profound forms of healing available. You carry your younger self inside you, frozen, unheard, stuck in the moment they first believed the world was unsafe. Now imagine going back, not with shame, but with compassion. Imagine sitting with that child and saying, "You didn't do anything wrong." You don't erase the pain. You reparent the self that had to endure it alone. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You've been calling it fate for years. The failed connection, the endless performing, the emptiness after the achievement, the walls you build and then wonder why no one climbs over them. This isn't fate. This is conditioning masquerading as destiny, and you don't destroy it by force. You transform it through awareness. Let's bring in Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and still had the courage to write, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That space, that tiny pause between reaction and action, is the gateway. It's the moment you feel the old fear rising and choose not to obey it. It's the second you feel unworthy and say, "I see you, but I'm not listening this time." This is the beginning of becoming your true self, not the version of you shaped by fear, but the one led by truth. But beware, the world won't always support your healing. It benefits from your conformity, from your self-abandonment, from your loyalty to roles that serve others more than they serve you. That's why healing is inherently subversive. When you stop playing the part, others may resist. When you set boundaries, people might leave. When you show your truth, some will reject it. Let them, because the cost of staying silent, staying small, staying inauthentic is far greater. This is the paradox of growth. You have to lose what's false to find what's real. You have to grieve the version of you that was never loved unconditionally. You have to face the unbearable truth that some people couldn't meet you where you needed them to, and then you have to give yourself what they couldn't. You become the witness, the guide, the parent, the protector. You become the very person you once begged the world to send, and what happens then? You stop reacting, you start responding, you stop chasing love, you start embodying it, you stop needing to prove yourself, because you realize you were never broken to begin with, you were just adapting, and now, finally, you're choosing. So here's your rebellion. Be soft in a world that demanded hardness. Be honest in a world that rewards the mask. Be present with the parts of you that were always told to stay hidden. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And if you do this, if you dare to reclaim your story, to reparent your pain, to walk back through the fire not to punish yourself, but to liberate yourself, you will see something extraordinary, a glimpse of a life not shaped by fear, but by truth, a self that is not reaction, but revolution. And beyond that, there is something even deeper, not just healing, not just freedom, but a revelation so powerful, it makes all the pain make sense. Let's go there. You've searched everywhere, through books, through success, through heartbreak, through late nights staring at the ceiling, wondering why everything you achieve still feels hollow, through therapists, podcasts, gurus, breakdowns, breakthroughs. You've asked the same question in 1,000 forms. What's wrong with me? And now, after all the layers peeled back, all the shadows faced, comes the answer you never expected. Nothing. There was never anything wrong with you. There was only a child trying to stay alive in a world that misunderstood their soul. Look again. What you thought were flaws were actually adaptations. Your anxiety, a sensitive system alerting you to danger long before you had words for fear. Your people-pleasing, a survival strategy born from a time when love had to be earned. Your perfectionism, a shield to avoid the shame of not being enough. Your numbness, a gift from your nervous system protecting you from pain too heavy to bear. You weren't broken. You were brilliant, in the way only children can be when the world feels unsafe. You crafted armor from silence. You made masks from obedience. You became whoever you had to be, not because you lacked identity, but because you lacked safety. That wasn't dysfunction. That was genius. And now you're here, older, wiser, exhausted. Not because you failed to grow, but because you grew in unnatural soil. You bloomed in shadows, and still somehow you made it. But the price, you mistook your mask for your face. You believed the lie. This is who I am. But what if who you are is what remains after the mask falls away? Let's return to Carl Jung, who told us that wholeness does not come from perfection, but from integration. Healing isn't about becoming someone else, it's about becoming more fully yourself. The self that includes the wounded parts, the rejected parts, the forgotten parts. It's about welcoming home the child who learned to disappear. Because beneath all the conditioning, the fear, the coping, something sacred was always waiting. Something untouched. Something true. Here's the ultimate truth. Your core, your essence, is not trauma. It is not shame. It is not fear. Those are layers wrapped around something eternal. You are not your pain. You are the one who witnessed it. You are not your patterns. You are the life beneath them. And that life has been quietly waiting, not for permission, not for validation, but for you, for your willingness to stop running, to stop performing, to turn inward and listen. Imagine this. You sit quietly, hands in your lap, you close your eyes, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, you don't try to fix anything. You simply ask, what have I been hiding from? The answer may come in images, in feelings, in the echo of a memory you thought you forgot. A parent's disapproving glance, a slammed door, a report card covered in red ink, a moment of joy that was met with silence. And then, if you stay, something else arrives, not just pain, but the one who felt it, the child, the dreamer, the soft, radiant being who once believed the world would meet them with love. They're still there. They always were. You didn't lose them. You buried them. And now, you can dig them up, not to expose them, but to free them. This is why every decision feels heavy, why joy slips through your fingers, why your relationships feel like rehearsals, not communion. Because the one making the choices isn't your whole self. It's the scared self, the defended self, the version of you that still believes love must be earned and truth must be hidden. But now you know better. Now you see the strings, and once seen, they lose their power. So what now? You live differently. You stop trying to become lovable and start remembering that you always were. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop settling for connections that require your silence. You stop proving yourself to people who wouldn't recognize your truth, even if you screamed it. You start choosing based on desire, not fear. You start honoring what feels alive, not what feels expected. You start living not as a reaction, but as a response to something deeper, yourself, the one untouched by trauma, the one who remembers. And yes, there will be grief. You will mourn the years spent disconnected. You will ache for the love you never received. You will wish someone had taught you this sooner. But grief is not a weakness. It is the cost of awakening, and on the other side of that grief, peace. Not because life is easy, but because you are finally home within yourself. So here is the final, most powerful realization. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. You are not here to perform a version of yourself that makes others comfortable. You are not here to reenact old wounds until you're too numb to care. You are here to remember the sacredness that was always inside you before they told you to hide it. Every decision you've made was shaped by your past, but the next one doesn't have to be. The next word you speak, the next boundary you set, the next truth you honor. Let it come from your real self, not your wounded self, not your scared self, not the ghost of your childhood, but the soul that outlived it. Close your eyes. Breathe. There is no rush now, no role to perform, no story to uphold. Only this question: what would your life look like if you stopped trying to be good and started trying to be real? The answer isn't found in a book or a therapist or a video. It's found in the one place you've been avoiding, yourself. And when you go there, not to fix, but to feel, not to rush, but to remember, you'll finally hear the voice that was buried beneath all the noise. It won't yell. It will whisper, "You were always enough." And this time, you'll believe it.